He thought the badge on his chest made him untouchable, but by noon that same badge would feel heavier than iron. The Richmond District Courthouse woke slowly under a gray Virginia sky, its stone steps damp from the kind of morning mist that settled over the city before sunrise. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed above polished floors, and the scent of burnt coffee drifted through narrow hallways lined with framed portraits of men who had once called themselves guardians of justice. Lawyers adjusted ties, clerks stacked folders, and deputies traded jokes in voices just low enough to sound respectable. It looked like any ordinary Monday, but places built on routine often hide the loudest truths. Officer Daniel Brooks stood near courtroom 4B with the relaxed confidence of a man who had never once doubted he belonged. 6'2", broad shoulders, pressed uniform, silver badge gleaming beneath the overhead lights. He carried himself like the building answered to him. Some officers wore authority. Daniel performed it. He nodded at the bailiff, ignored the janitor, and smirked at his own reflection in the courthouse window. For 17 years he had learned the same lesson over and over again. If you sound certain enough, most people step aside. The hallway quieted when a woman entered through the side doors carrying a black leather briefcase. She moved with calm precision, not hurried, not hesitant, her heels clicking softly against the marble tile. She wore a navy blazer, tailored slacks, and glasses that framed eyes too steady to be nervous. Her name was Vanessa Carter, though no one in that hallway said it yet. To most people watching, she was simply a black woman walking into a place where many had already decided she did not belong. Daniel noticed her the way some men notice a challenge before they understand it. His jaw tightened. His smile sharpened. Then he stepped directly into her path. "Court staff entrance is around back," he said loudly enough for 3 nearby attorneys to hear. A few turned their heads. Vanessa stopped, but did not step back. She looked at him once, then at the courtroom doors, then back to him. Calm. Silent. That silence irritated him, more than any argument could have. "You didn't hear me?" Daniel asked, voice rising. "This courtroom is for authorized personnel only." A clerk behind the desk froze with a file in her hand. The bailiff looked down at his shoes. Even the old wall clock seemed louder. Tick, tick, tick. Vanessa shifted the briefcase to her other hand. "I'm exactly where I need to be," she said, her voice level and clear. Daniel laughed once, short and dry. "That confidence is impressive," he said. Misplaced, but impressive. A couple of spectators near the benches exchanged glances. Someone let out an awkward chuckle. Vanessa did not blink. Imagine standing there while strangers weigh your worth before they know your name. Imagine knowing the room is watching to see whether you shrink. She didn't. She simply waited. Daniel took one step closer, lowering his voice as if pretending to be polite. "Take a seat in the gallery and stay quiet until someone calls you." Then louder again, for everyone to hear. "That is, if you're supposed to be here at all." The hallway air changed. It was subtle, almost invisible, like the pressure before a storm. A federal attorney, entering from the east corridor, slowed his pace. 2 courthouse deputies straightened instinctively. The clerk at the desk swallowed hard. Daniel noticed none of it. Men certain of their own power rarely notice when the room stops agreeing with them. Vanessa set her briefcase gently on the security table. Her hand rested on it for a moment. Then she looked directly into Daniel Brooks with an expression so composed it unsettled even the people pretending not to watch. "Officer," she said quietly, "you should be careful what kind of scene you create in a courthouse." Daniel grinned. "And you should be careful giving advice in a building you don't belong in." Somewhere beyond the closed courtroom doors, a voice called for all personnel to prepare for morning session. Footsteps approached from both ends of the hall. Keys jingled. Papers shuffled. And for the first time that morning, the people around Daniel Brooks looked at Vanessa Carter not with doubt, but with anticipation. The double doors of courtroom 4B opened with a slow, mechanical groan, and the hallway emptied into rows of worn wooden benches polished by decades of anxious hands. Morning light slipped through tall windows and stretched across the floor in pale bars, meeting the cold glow of fluorescent fixtures overhead. The room carried the familiar sounds of government routine. Papers sliding across tables, shoes brushing tile, whispers cut short whenever someone in uniform passed. At the center stood the raised bench where Judge Eleanor Hayes would soon preside, her chair still empty, her gavel resting beside a stack of case files like a promise no one fully trusted. Daniel Brooks entered first and took his position near the rail with the same swagger he had worn in the hallway. He adjusted his cuffs, nodded to another officer, and leaned against the side barrier as if he owned the room by habit alone. A few regular attorneys gave him polite smiles. Others avoided eye contact. Everyone in that courthouse knew Daniel had influence. Fewer people were willing to say what kind. Vanessa Carter stepped in moments later carrying the same black briefcase, unhurried and composed. She chose a seat at the front counsel table rather than the gallery, setting the case neatly beside a legal pad. The move drew immediate attention. Heads turned. A prosecutor paused mid-sentence. A reporter lowered his pen. Daniel looked over, laughed under his breath, and pushed off the rail. "Ma'am, that section is reserved," he said, loud enough for half the room to hear. Vanessa glanced at the placard on the table, then back at him. "I am aware," she answered. Her calmness irritated him again. Some people mistake silence for weakness because they have never met disciplined strength. Daniel walked closer, stopping just short of the table. "Then let me make this easy for you," he said. "Visitors sit in the back. Staff sit where they are assigned. You are neither." The words hung in the room. A young law clerk stiffened. One of the bailiffs shifted uneasily. Vanessa opened her legal pad and uncapped a pen. "You should focus on your duties, Officer Brooks," she said. Hearing his last name from her lips caught him off guard for a split second, but pride covered it quickly. "Interesting," he said. "You know who I am. That means you also know I do not repeat myself." He placed one hand on the back of the empty chair beside her and pulled it away from the table. "Move." The sound scraped across the floor like a warning. Vanessa did not reach for the chair. She simply looked at him with a steadiness that made the nearest spectators suddenly interested in anything else. Imagine trying to embarrass someone who has already measured the room better than you have. Imagine mistaking patience for surrender. Daniel turned toward the gallery with a grin that asked for witnesses. "Every week somebody walks in here thinking rules do not apply to them," he announced. A couple of uneasy chuckles followed, thin and uncertain. He expected more. He always did. Instead, the side door near chambers opened and two senior administrators entered carrying folders. Both stopped when they saw Vanessa at the front table. Their posture changed instantly. One straightened his tie. The other whispered something to the clerk, who nearly dropped her papers. Daniel missed the exchange entirely. He was too busy enjoying the sound of his own authority. Vanessa wrote a single line on the pad, then closed it. "You still have time to correct this," she said quietly. Daniel leaned in with a smile polished by years of never being challenged. "Correct what?" he asked. Before she could answer, the courtroom deputy called out for all rise. Judge Eleanor Hayes stepped through the rear door in black robes, eyes sharp behind rimless glasses. Everyone stood except Vanessa, who remained seated for one deliberate heartbeat before rising with the rest. Judge Hayes scanned the room, saw Vanessa, and something unreadable crossed her face. Then she looked directly at Daniel Brooks, who was still smiling, and said in a voice that chilled the room, "Officer, why is Director Carter waiting for permission to begin?" The room did not merely go quiet. It seemed to forget how to breathe. Daniel Brooks stood frozen beside the front table, one hand still resting on the chair he had tried to drag away, his practiced smile collapsing into something smaller and far less confident. Around him, attorneys who had moments earlier avoided looking up now stared openly. The reporter in the second row lifted his pen so fast it nearly slipped from his fingers. Even the old air conditioner, humming near the rear wall, sounded suddenly too loud. Judge Eleanor Hayes remained standing behind the bench, her eyes fixed on Daniel with the measured patience of someone deciding how much embarrassment he had earned. "I asked you a question, officer," she said. Daniel cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I was only maintaining seating protocol." The words came out thinner than he intended. Vanessa Carter picked up her briefcase and placed it on the counsel table with calm precision. No anger, no triumph, just control. "Protocol," Judge Hayes repeated. Interesting choice of word. She sat, opened the morning docket, then closed it again without reading a line. Director Carter was appointed Regional Director of Court Operations effective today at 8 o'clock sharp. That was communicated to all courthouse security supervisors at 6:30 this morning. Several heads turned toward Daniel. He had checked his phone twice that morning and ignored both unread messages. Now that detail seemed to settle over him like wet concrete. Vanessa opened the briefcase and removed a slim folder marked Administrative Review. The movement was quiet, but every eye in the room followed it. She looked toward the bench first. "Good morning, Your Honor." Then toward the gallery. "Good morning, everyone." Her voice was clear, warm, and entirely steady. "I apologize for the delayed start. I was conducting an observation." Daniel blinked. "Observation?" he repeated before he could stop himself. Vanessa turned to him. "Yes, Officer Brooks. An unannounced workplace observation. Imagine realizing the person you dismissed has been evaluating you since the moment you spoke. Imagine hearing your own behavior described in the language of official process." Daniel straightened his shoulders, reaching for the confidence that had always returned before. "With respect, ma'am, there appears to be a misunderstanding. I was simply enforcing order." Vanessa nodded once as if noting a statement for the record. "At 7:48, you blocked authorized access to a secure corridor. At 7:51, you publicly questioned the status of an employee without cause. At 7:54, you attempted to remove assigned seating from a scheduled administrator." Each time stamp landed harder than the last. She had not only noticed everything, she had documented it. A low murmur moved through the benches before Judge Hayes silenced it with a glance. Daniel looked toward the bailiff, then the clerk, then anyone who might rescue him with a smile or a shrug. No one moved. Power often feels permanent until witnesses stop protecting it. "I did not know who she was," Daniel said finally. It was the wrong sentence, and the room knew it. Vanessa closed the folder halfway. "That is exactly the issue," she replied. "Professional conduct should not depend on identity, title, race, or whether someone can help your career." The reporter wrote furiously now. Two deputy marshals near the side wall exchanged a look that said this story would travel through every hallway before lunch. Judge Hayes folded her hands. "Director Carter, how would you like to proceed?" Vanessa glanced around the courtroom, taking in the polished wood, the seal above the bench, the people who had watched, and said nothing. "We proceed with dignity," she said. "Then we proceed with accountability." She removed another document from the briefcase and handed it to the clerk. The clerk read the first line, eyes widening, then passed copies toward the bench and security desk. Daniel recognized the header immediately, Internal Conduct Review. His name was printed at the top in bold letters. The confidence he had worn all morning finally left his face completely. And for the first time since entering that courthouse, Officer Daniel Brooks understood that the day had not begun with his authority. It had begun with his test. The paper moved from hand to hand across the courtroom like something contagious. Clerks who usually glanced at forms without thinking now read every line twice. Attorneys leaned sideways to catch a look at the header. Deputies who had spent years mastering blank expressions suddenly found the walls very interesting. Internal Conduct Review carried weight in any government building, but when it arrived on the first morning of a new director, it carried something else as well. Warning. Daniel Brooks remained standing beside the rail, shoulders squared out of habit even as the confidence beneath them cracked. "Your Honor," he said carefully, "I would request representation before answering any administrative accusations." Judge Eleanor Hayes adjusted her glasses and regarded him over folded hands. "No one has asked for answers yet, Officer Brooks. At this moment, the only thing requested of you was basic professionalism." A few people in the gallery looked down to hide their reactions. Vanessa Carter remained composed at the front table, turning one page in her folder with the same calm she had shown all morning. She was not rushing because people with real authority rarely need to. "For clarity," she said, addressing the room rather than Daniel alone, "this review did not begin today. Today only confirmed its urgency." That sentence changed everything. Daniel looked up sharply. "What does that mean?" Vanessa met his eyes. "It means complaints existed before sunrise." The room shifted again. Rumors had always floated through the courthouse halls like dust in old sunlight. Disrespectful comments. Selective enforcement. Delays for some visitors, courtesy for others. Reports written one way, remembered another. Most people heard them. Few wanted ownership of hearing them. Now those whispers had become a file with signatures. Imagine living inside a system where everyone knows the problem but waits for someone else to name it. Imagine being the person who finally does. Vanessa removed several sealed envelopes from the briefcase and handed them to the clerk. Witness statements, she said. Submitted confidentially over the last 6 months. Daniel's face tightened. He scanned the benches, trying to identify who might have spoken. The young clerk who had frozen earlier kept her eyes on her notes. The bailiff stared straight ahead. A maintenance supervisor in the back row suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. Silence can protect misconduct for years. It can also become evidence when enough people are tired. Judge Hayes opened one envelope, read a page, then another. Her expression did not change, which somehow made it worse. Officer Brooks, she said, these statements describe repeated discourtesy towards staff, inconsistent treatment of visitors, and conduct unbecoming courthouse security. Daniel inhaled sharply. Anonymous statements are not facts. Vanessa answered before the judge could. No, patterns are facts. She slid another document forward. Time logs, visitor camera stills, entry records, dates lined up beside names and badge numbers with the cold precision of math. Daniel recognized 2 mornings immediately. One involved a veteran he had made wait outside in the rain. Another involved an elderly woman he had redirected 3 times before allowing her through screening. At the time, each moment felt too small to matter. That is how arrogance survives, by dividing harm into pieces and calling each one minor. I was doing my job, Daniel said louder now. Maintaining standards. Vanessa nodded once. Then let us discuss standards. She turned toward the gallery. How many people here have entered this courthouse nervous, grieving, confused, or afraid? Hands did not rise, but faces answered. Security is often the first voice they hear, the first look they receive, the first signal of whether justice is real or decorative. Even the reporter stopped writing for a moment. Judge Hayes leaned back slowly. Director Carter, continue. Vanessa's gaze returned to Daniel. This morning I arrived unannounced with full credentials. You did not ask for them. You judged first and verified never. The sentence struck harder than anger would have. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. There was no careful response left. Judge Hayes reached for her gavel, but did not use it. She did not need to. Officer Brooks, she said, effective immediately, surrender courthouse access credentials pending formal review. The room stayed still as stone. Daniel touched the badge clipped near his chest, not removing it yet, as if a delay of 2 seconds might change the order. It did not. And for the second time that morning, every person watching learned the difference between wearing authority and deserving it. The metallic click of Daniel Brooks unclipping his access badge seemed louder than any shout could have been. He held it in his palm for a moment, staring at the small rectangle that had opened doors, silenced questions, and fed a certainty he once mistook for respect. Then he placed it on the clerk's desk. No one spoke. In courthouses, people learn quickly when silence says more than words. Judge Eleanor Hayes reviewed the next matter on the docket, but everyone knew the morning had already changed course. Routine had been interrupted by accountability, and buildings like this rarely enjoyed that feeling. Vanessa Carter stood and addressed the bench with measured calm. Your Honor, with permission, I recommend proceedings continue as scheduled. Litigants should not lose their day in court because staff failed theirs. Judge Hayes gave a small nod. Granted. The sentence landed with quiet force. Vanessa had every reason to make the moment about Daniel. Instead, she made it about the public. Several attorneys exchanged glances that carried something close to respect. Daniel remained near the side rail, now separated from the authority of his uniform by an invisible but unmistakable distance. 2 deputies approached, not roughly, not dramatically, simply professionally. They requested his radio, courthouse keys, and incident notebook. He surrendered each item slower than the last. Pride often leaves one pocket at a time. You can wait in interview room B until administration arrives, one deputy said. Daniel looked toward colleagues who once laughed at his jokes and borrowed his confidence. Some studied their shoes. Others suddenly had urgent paperwork. No one stepped forward. Imagine building your identity on being feared, only to discover fear does not attend you when the room changes sides. As Daniel was escorted toward the side hallway, he stopped and turned back toward Vanessa. You set me up, he said. His voice was lower now, stripped of theater. Vanessa did not raise hers to meet it. No, she replied. I gave you space to choose. The room absorbed that sentence like rain on dry ground. Daniel had no answer because deep down he knew it was true. No trap had forced his tone. No policy had written his words for him. He had arrived carrying his own habits. Once the door closed behind him, courtroom for B exhaled. The ordinary sounds of legal business slowly returned. Chairs creaked. Pins moved. Someone coughed near the back row. Yet something had shifted beneath those familiar noises. People who worked there every day now looked at one another differently, as if seeing who had stayed silent and who had not. Vanessa approached the security desk and reviewed staffing assignments. Deputy Reed, she said to the older bailiff, please rotate front entrance coverage every 2 hours. Fatigue creates mistakes. Yes, ma'am, he answered immediately. Clerk Simmons, I would like multilingual visitor guides printed by tomorrow morning. The young clerk blinked. Tomorrow. Vanessa smiled faintly. Justice should be understandable in more than one language. The clerk smiled back before she could stop herself. Small acts of fairness can feel radical in places starved of them. By 10:15, the courthouse lobby already carried whispers. Some said the new director had arrived undercover. Others claimed she had reviewed 6 months of footage overnight. Stories grow quickly when people sense consequences. Vanessa ignored all of them. She walked the metal detectors, checked visitor lines, greeted janitors by name after reading badges, and asked a nervous father where he needed to go. When he explained he was late for a custody hearing, she personally guided him to the right floor. Staff noticed. They always notice what leaders do before they notice what leaders say. Near 11 o'clock, Judge Hayes requested a brief recess and met Vanessa privately in chambers. You made an entrance, the judge said dryly. Vanessa set down her folder. I made an observation. Judge Hayes allowed herself the smallest smile. This building needed one. Then her expression turned serious. Daniel Brooks is not the only file on your desk, is he? Vanessa looked through the chamber window toward the busy hallway beyond. No, Your Honor, she said softly. He was only the first page. By noon, the courthouse moved with the uneasy energy of a building that had discovered mirrors. Every hallway carried fresh whispers. Every office door closed a little faster than usual, and every employee who had once depended on being overlooked now wondered whether overlooked was ending. Vanessa Carter walked through that tension without rushing. She carried a tablet instead of the black briefcase now, reviewing schedules, complaint logs, maintenance requests, and staffing charts as she moved from floor to floor. Real reform rarely arrives with speeches. It arrives with clipboards, timestamps, and follow-through. On the 3rd floor, she stopped beside a waiting area where families sat beneath a flickering television tuned to silent local news. A grandmother held a folder so tightly the edges had bent. A teenage boy tapped his foot beside her, trying to look calm and failing. Vanessa crouched slightly to meet the woman's eyes. How long have you been waiting? She asked. Almost 2 hours, the woman said softly. They told us someone would guide us to juvenile court. Vanessa checked the schedule and looked toward the unmanned information desk 10 feet away. Empty chair. Half-finished coffee. No staff. She made one call. Within 3 minutes, a supervisor arrived apologizing before he reached them. Vanessa did not raise her voice. Apologies are kind, she said. Systems are kinder. Then she personally escorted the family to the correct elevator. Employees nearby pretended not to watch, but they watched every step. On the 2nd floor, she entered Security Office B, where a whiteboard listed officer rotations in rushed marker. Several names appeared repeatedly on light assignments while others handled entrances, screenings, and late hours. Favoritism leaves paperwork fingerprints. Deputy Reed stood when she entered. Director Carter. At ease, Deputy, she said. Who approves these rotations? Reed hesitated. Officer Brooks usually managed them, with occasional sign-off. Vanessa scanned the board once more. Usually. One officer had enjoyed weekday mornings for 4 straight months. Another had closed every Friday night. A single mother had 6 weekend shifts in a row. Numbers tell stories people are afraid to. Effective tomorrow, Vanessa said, erasing half the board. Rotations will be transparent, equalized, and posted 2 weeks in advance. Reed almost smiled. That will make some people unhappy. Vanessa capped the marker. Fairness often does, at first. Meanwhile, in interview room B, Daniel Brooks sat alone at a steel table with a paper cup of water untouched beside him. The room was plain enough to feel honest. No audience. No hallway to dominate. No one impressed by posture. He replayed the morning again and again, each memory growing sharper now that no pride blurred it. Her calm face, the timestamps, the judge's tone. He had told himself for years that he was enforcing standards, keeping order, saying what others were too timid to say. But in a quiet room, excuses lose volume. At 12:30, Human Resources Director Melissa Grant entered carrying a folder and a legal pad. "Officer Brooks," she said, taking the opposite chair, "this is an administrative interview." Daniel straightened instinctively. "I want it noted that I was targeted." Melissa wrote nothing for a moment. "Noted," she said. "Now I would like to discuss prior complaints." She listed dates, witnesses, language reports, disparate treatment concerns, training refusals, missed de-escalation seminars signed off as completed. Daniel interrupted twice, denied 3 items, minimized 4. By the 5th, even he heard the repetition in his own answers. Melissa finally closed the folder. "Do you know what every complaint has in common?" Daniel said nothing. "Different people," she continued. "Same description of how you made them feel." Across the building, Vanessa stood in the lobby beside the metal detectors watching visitors pass through. She greeted a construction worker, then a public defender, then a woman pushing a stroller. Each received the same tone, the same eye contact, the same dignity. A young officer beside her noticed and adjusted his own posture. Culture changes one copied behavior at a time. Her tablet vibrated with a message from Human Resources. Interview progressing. Additional concerns confirmed. Vanessa read it, locked the screen, and looked toward the revolving front doors where sunlight spilled across the tile. Judge Hayes had been right. Daniel Brooks was only the first page. And somewhere deeper in the file, other names were beginning to worry. By 1:30 in the afternoon, Richmond District Courthouse no longer felt like the same building that had opened its doors that morning. The walls were unchanged, the elevators still slow, the coffee still bitter, yet something invisible had shifted in every corridor. People were standing straighter. Voices were lower. Doors once left half open for favored conversations now stayed shut. Accountability has a way of changing the temperature of a room without touching the thermostat. Vanessa Carter spent the early afternoon in conference room A with department leads from security, clerks, facilities, and public services. She sat at the head of the table with no dramatic entrance and no wasted words. A projector displayed visitor wait times, staffing gaps, maintenance delays, and unresolved complaints dating back nearly a year. "This courthouse handles families in crisis, criminal matters, housing disputes, child custody, and lives under pressure," she said. "If our systems are careless, then justice arrives already wounded." No one checked a phone. No one whispered to a neighbor. They had expected speeches about image. They got standards instead. She assigned deadlines measured in hours, not months. Broken signage replaced by tomorrow. Translation services expanded by Friday. Complaint responses within 48 hours. Staff training mandatory, attendance verified in person. Every instruction was clear enough to measure and simple enough to obey. In the rear corner, Deputy Reed watched with quiet admiration. He had served 22 years and seen many leaders arrive carrying slogans. This one had brought calendars. Across the hall, Human Resources completed the first stage of Daniel Brooks's interview. Melissa Grant slid a final form across the steel table. "Pending review, you are placed on administrative leave effective immediately." Daniel stared at the paper as if it were written in another language. "For one misunderstanding?" he asked. Melissa's tone remained neutral. "For a documented pattern." She stood, gathered her notes, and paused before the door. "Sometimes people mistake tolerated behavior for acceptable behavior, Officer Brooks. They are not the same." When she left, the room felt smaller than before. Daniel leaned back and looked at the ceiling tiles. He remembered mornings when clerks went silent as he approached. He had called that respect. He remembered visitors thanking him nervously after he corrected them sharply. He had called that order. He remembered colleagues laughing along because disagreement cost energy. He had called that agreement. In a quiet room, language becomes honest. At 2:15, Vanessa walked through the public records office where a line of 12 people waited beneath a handwritten out to lunch sign even though lunch had ended 40 minutes earlier. She asked one man how long he had been standing there. "About an hour," he said, tired but polite. Vanessa stepped behind the counter, found 2 employees chatting in the back file area, and called them forward without anger. "The public should never have to wonder if they matter," she said. Within minutes the line began moving. A woman holding eviction papers nearly cried when helped at last. Small efficiencies can feel like mercy when people arrive carrying fear. News of the morning had spread beyond the courthouse by then. 2 local reporters waited near the front steps hoping for comment. Vanessa declined both interviews. "No statement today," she said. "Today is for work." The answer circulated faster than any speech would have. By mid-afternoon, employees who once hid behind slow process realized there would be no hiding behind delay. Judge Eleanor Hayes watched from her chamber's window as visitors were guided more quickly through security than she had seen in years. She called her clerk. "How many complaints have we received this afternoon?" "None," the clerk answered. The judge raised an eyebrow. "How many compliments?" The clerk checked a note. 7 so far." Hayes almost smiled. Near 3 o'clock, Vanessa returned to courtroom 4B. Now empty except for sunlight stretching across the benches. She stood where Daniel had blocked her path only hours earlier. The room was quiet enough to hear the old clock again. Tick, tick, tick. Some moments break a person. Others reveal one. She placed a new policy binder on the front table labeled Equal Access Procedures. Then she looked toward the courtroom doors and said softly to no one and everyone, "This building belongs to the public now." In the hallway outside, several employees who overheard her straightened their shoulders without even realizing it. At 4 o'clock, the courthouse usually sagged into the tired rhythm of late afternoon, but that day it moved with unusual purpose. Lines were shorter. Questions were answered faster. Doors opened for people who once would have stood unnoticed. Even the security checkpoint sounded different. Less barked instruction, more clear direction. Visitors felt it without knowing why. Staff felt it because they did. Vanessa Carter stood in the operations office reviewing the first-day metrics already arriving on her screen. Average entry wait time had dropped by 11 minutes. Public records processing had doubled since noon. Missed courtroom escorts were down to 0. Numbers do not celebrate, but they tell the truth when people will not. Deputy Reed entered carrying a thin folder. "Additional statements," he said. "Voluntary this time." Vanessa accepted it. The top page came from a receptionist who described years of watching nervous visitors dismissed for asking simple questions. Another came from a veteran who said Daniel Brooks mocked his hearing difficulty during screening. Another from a young intern who had considered quitting after repeated comments about who did and did not belong in professional spaces. Vanessa closed the folder gently. Harm often survives by being called small. Reed shifted his weight. "People are talking, Director." "Good or bad?" she asked. "Honest," he said. That answer earned the faintest smile. Across the building, Daniel Brooks was escorted from interview room B to collect personal belongings from his locker under supervision. The hallway he had walked for years now seemed longer, each step echoing off walls that no longer recognized him. Officers passed with nods too brief to be friendship and too careful to be cruelty. He opened the locker and found the ordinary remains of a career day. Spare gloves, mints, an extra tie, framed photo of himself at a commendation ceremony, coffee gift cards, sunglasses he had forgotten last summer. Objects from a life built around routine suddenly looked like props after closing night. "Take what is personal," the escorting deputy said. Daniel held the framed photo for several seconds, then set it back on the shelf. Imagine discovering that what you wanted remembered was never the part people respected. When he reached the lobby, visitors barely noticed him leave. No whispers, no pointing, no dramatic downfall. Just a man carrying a cardboard box through revolving doors as afternoon sunlight hit the courthouse steps. Consequences are often quieter than arrogance expects. Outside, 2 reporters standing near the curb recognized him immediately and started forward with questions. Daniel lowered his head and kept walking. For years he had controlled every hallway conversation. Now he could not control a sidewalk. Inside, Vanessa met with Judge Eleanor Hayes one final time before close of business. The judge removed her reading glasses and studied the younger woman with measured curiosity. "You know there will be pushback," Hayes said. "There always is when comfort is interrupted." Vanessa nodded. "Then let discomfort become policy for a while." Hayes laughed once, brief and genuine. "I may quote that." Then her expression softened. "You handled today with more restraint than many would have." Vanessa looked through the chamber window toward families still moving through the lobby below. "This was never about humiliating one man," she said. It was about protecting everyone after him. The judge said nothing for a moment because some truths deserve room. At 5:10, the final docket closed. Clerks packed bags. Bailiffs checked empty benches. Cleaning crews rolled carts into hallways that had carried too much tension for too long. Vanessa returned alone to courtroom 4B. Evening light poured through the tall windows, turning dust into gold above the rows of benches. She walked to the front rail, where Daniel had once stood blocking her path. Then she placed a brass nameplate on the operations desk just outside the door. Vanessa Carter, Regional Director. No flourish. No audience. Just fact. A young clerk passing by paused. "Congratulations, ma'am," she said quietly. Vanessa looked at her kindly. "Do not congratulate me yet," she replied. "Judge me by what this place feels like in 6 months." The clerk nodded and continued down the hall. Vanessa remained a moment longer, listening to the old clock mark another minute. Tick, tick, tick. This morning the building had measured titles. By evening, it had started measuring character. 6 months later, the Richmond District Courthouse opened before sunrise to a line of people that moved steadily instead of nervously. New signs in English and Spanish guided visitors from the front doors to every major department. Security officers greeted each person with the same script, the same eye contact, the same patience. Parents carrying folders stood beside business owners in pressed suits, beside teenagers in hoodies, beside elderly couples walking slowly with canes, and for once no one could tell from the first 30 seconds whether the building would honor them by how they looked. That was the point. Inside, the lobby monitors displayed average wait times, courtroom locations, and public assistance resources. Complaint forms were visible instead of hidden. Translation headsets sat charged at the information desk. Staff rotations were posted openly 2 weeks ahead, and favoritism had become harder to disguise than fairness. Some employees had resisted every change. Most had adapted. A surprising number had flourished the moment standards became clear. Vanessa Carter walked through the lobby carrying coffee in one hand and a tablet in the other, dressed with the same calm precision she had worn on her first day. Several employees greeted her by name. She greeted each one back. Leadership had changed the culture, but consistency had kept it changed. Deputy Reed, now promoted to security supervisor, approached with the morning report. "No unresolved incidents from yesterday," he said. "Visitor satisfaction cards are up again." Vanessa took the report and smiled lightly. "That means people were treated like people. We should not need applause for that." Reed grinned. "Still nice to see the numbers." They entered courtroom 4B together, where sunlight once again crossed the polished floor in pale bars. The room looked the same as it had 6 months earlier, yet it felt entirely different. Fear had once lived in subtle places there, in delayed glances, in lowered voices, in who expected to be dismissed. Now the room felt professional, not performative, respectful, not tense. Judge Eleanor Hayes stepped in from chambers and set her files down. "Director Carter," she said, "I heard another county is asking how we turn things around." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Did you tell them?" The judge almost smiled. "I told them reform begins the moment excuses stop being accepted." Imagine that. A courthouse becoming known not for scandal, but for improvement. Outside on the courthouse steps, a city bus stopped and passengers stepped off into the cool morning air. Among them was Daniel Brooks. He wore plain clothes now and carried a lunch bag instead of a duty belt. After resigning during the formal review, he had taken a maintenance job at a warehouse across town. The pay was lower, the authority non-existent, the schedule unforgiving. Yet something in his posture had changed too. Less performance, more weight. He had passed this building twice before and kept walking. Today he stopped across the street for a long moment. Through the glass doors he could see visitors entering smoothly, officers assisting an elderly man with the scanner, a young mother being guided toward family court without confusion. No chaos, no disrespect, no need for someone like the man he used to be. Some losses arrive as punishment. Others arrive as education. Daniel watched until the pedestrian signal changed, then turned and continued down the block without stepping inside. He did not need to. The lesson was already visible from the sidewalk. Back upstairs, Vanessa reviewed a final file and signed off on a scholarship partnership for interns from underserved neighborhoods interested in public service careers. "Open the pipeline," she said to the clerk beside her. Do not just repair the doorway. Near noon, she paused outside courtroom 4B and looked at the brass nameplate mounted beside the operations office. It had become ordinary now, which was exactly what progress should become. Ordinary. Routine. Expected. The old wall clock ticked above the hallway as people moved with purpose around her. Tick, tick, tick. 6 months earlier, a man had tried to decide who belonged in this building by sight alone. Now the building answered for itself. It belonged to anyone seeking justice, and to no one seeking superiority. Vanessa picked up her tablet and walked forward as another crowd entered through the front doors. He once wore authority like a costume. She built it into the walls.